All right. Welcome to the Recruiting Blitz podcast. I'm Tim Verghese, recruiting analyst here at Inside Nebraska. Before we get started, be sure to like and subscribe. I'm here joined by our old friend Greg Smith, now Rivals Midwest analyst. Greg, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. I appreciate the invite to come on as you get this thing going back up. So I'm excited to be here.
Yep. We're getting this started back up. Obviously Greg's moved on now to the Midwest job. We're excited for him and we're working with him still plenty.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're here. We're getting this podcast started. And yeah, it's been a busy April, coming out of a busy April for Nebraska. Now in the middle of midway through May, kind of things are getting quiet as we head into what was expected to be another busy June. So kind of wanted to talk some Midwest recruiting, some top Nebraska targets. So I guess we'll start here. I guess the biggest news of this last week for Nebraska, outside of visits, has been Dawson Merritt has pretty much eliminated Oklahoma from contention. It's coming down to Nebraska and Alabama, and he has an Alabama official visit scheduled for the first week of June. Greg, kind of what have you heard on this recruitment, and kind of what do you think is working in Nebraska's favor and Alabama's favor here?
Yeah, I think that this one is a good one for Nebraska, and that I saw this conversation pop up on Twitter. It was like, hey, Nebraska is in here battling with top defensive guys with Alabama. They're doing something right, which is true, right? Even though it's not Nick Saban down there anymore. I've told anyone that'll listen that I think that Kalen DeBoer is going to be just fine down there. So to be in a battle with them, I think is a good spot to be in for Matt Rule and company. I would prefer for if you're a Nebraska fan for those visit order to be flipped. I would have liked Nebraska to have gotten the last visit on that one, just because of what we saw the last time he was out in Tuscaloosa, right? That was when you had all the talk about the momentum of Alabama surging. And so that would make you a little nervous. And so I think that he really, obviously, with those two being the top two, he really likes both schools. He's got a really good relationship with Rob Dvorak, the linebackers coach at Nebraska. I think that they've pitched him well on the ability to use him in a variety of ways in the defense. And I don't know if you guys saw it, like his dad tweeted out like a checklist of things that he thinks the top prospects should be looking at if they're when they're going through their recruitment. And Nebraska stacks up well if you look at the details of that list that he put out. And so I think Nebraska's in a good position. I just worry about the fact that that last visit is going to Alabama, and that could be one that pushes them over the top. We'll see. I think that it could go either way at this point. I think it's really intriguing, though, that he eliminated Oklahoma, and it's just either Nebraska or Alabama, because OU people really felt good about him for a long time being in their class. And it looks like that's not going to be the case. But he's a really good player, and you're going to have to sweat this one out on both sides, either the Alabama or the Nebraska side.
Yeah, I agree. That Oklahoma development, I agree, is definitely interesting. Felt like they started to fade midway through last month as he made two visits to Nebraska and two visits to Tuscaloosa kind of in that month of April. And I think during those visits, it's kind of started to talking to him on the phone. He was like, Oklahoma's still there, but not as much. It kind of made it sound like, hey, they're fading, and now officially it comes out, hey, Oklahoma's out of it. I was in Kansas City this weekend. We'd heard some pretty positive intel about where Nebraska sits right now. But again, that last Alabama visit is concerning, something to definitely keep an eye on. I don't think Nebraska feels comfortable here yet. I don't think Alabama feels comfortable here yet too. This is a relationships recruitment. Pretty
Definitely.
much. He's talked about how much relationships are important here. And he stated he has more relationships at Nebraska than anywhere else, but perhaps his best relationship individually with a coach is in Alabama. So that, is something to keep an eye on. Again, you don't really know kind of what's more important at this point for him. Is it having a multitude of strong relationships, or is it that one really, really strong relationship that will ultimately win out here? Dawson's in Kansas, but on that Missouri-Kansas border. Some other Missouri guys, Nebraska's really pushing for this cycle. Corey Sims is making a visit in June. How realistic is it for Nebraska here?
I think this is a tough one for Nebraska, honestly. I think that they're on the outside looking in with Sims, but I give him a puncher's chance in this one because of the kind of a good rule of thumb, obviously, especially with Nebraska, is you get him on campus and you never know what can happen. Nebraska seems to really do a good job with these visits, especially with this staff, of making sure that guys feel welcome, showing them pieces of the program to make it feel like, they get a true representation of a day in the life of a student athlete at Nebraska. And with all of the kind of amenities, the facilities, the things that Nebraska provides for kids, they can make a real strong push there. But the problem in this recruitment in particular for me as it relates to Nebraska is Missouri. Missouri has been on fire over this offseason when it comes to landing targets, especially landing targets in state. They've done a really nice job with that. And I've talked to several of those kids who've committed to Missouri, and they all basically say the same thing. I've never seen Missouri be this good in my lifetime, is what they say. And I also think that there is an element of their NIL operation is very, very good. And I think that that's helping them as well. And it's something that's kind of an elephant in the room. But it's not to say that Nebraska's is bad. I know people are going to flood in with the 1890 comments, but that's not what I'm saying. It's more so just about what Missouri is doing. And I think that Corey Sims, it's a compelling package for him to stay home at Missouri, but I do give Nebraska a puncher's chance considering they're going to get one of those official visits.
Right. And yeah, for those of you who are unaware, obviously us on the recruiting side of things, we have to be aware of some of this stuff. But in the state of Missouri, players can, sign NIL paperwork with in-state programs, even in high school. I believe it's as long as they're a senior, correct?
Yeah, I think it's if they're a senior. But yeah, because it was William and Wary was the defensive lineman that was very famously made aware of everybody last year with that rule. So yeah, they definitely could do that.
So that's something working in Missouri's favor that they have, that a lot of other programs just do not have the opportunity to offer because of state legislation. So again, that is an element here, and that's an element, the Missouri, the NIL, all of that. It did come back and no, I wouldn't even say come back, but it did bite Nebraska in the Jack Lang recruitment. That was one that, at one point Nebraska felt confident in, Michigan felt confident in, and, he ended up committing to Missouri last month. Staying on the topic of Missouri, just one last target kind of in that state that Nebraska's really in on, Jamarion Parker. It's been quiet for him a little bit since, decommitting from Arkansas. He scheduled some official visits, made it up to Nebraska in April. Kind of what are you hearing there? Is there a timeline do you think that he has in mind, or kind of where are things at with him right now?
Yeah, I think that, we talked earlier about Dawson Merritt and that one being a relationships recruitment. This is another one with Jamarion Parker where it's definitely a relationships recruitment. And I think that the thing that I hear is that his strongest relationship in his recruitment is with running backs coach in Nebraska, EJ Barthel. I think that will go a long way for Nebraska. I've got a future cast in for Parker to end up at Nebraska. I still feel solid with that. They did get that TCU offer. He is setting up other officials. There are teams that continue to kind of sniff around. The one thing that I would watch though on this one is, I don't know his timeline right now. I don't reach out and ask. But the one thing is if I'm Nebraska or any of these schools right now pursuing him, I don't want him to get to his senior season uncommitted, right? I think you want to push to get him committed and kind of in the boat and feeling as comfortable as possible before his season, because I think that once he gets back out there playing again, he could be a kid that really takes off again, even as we've seen him get a nice bump after decommitting from Arkansas. Like I think that he's a kid that is still leaning towards Nebraska, and I feel good there, but you want to get that one finished off this summer.
For sure. I think kind of people forget how like limited he was last season and what, like a strong senior year, especially at a powerhouse program.
Oh yeah.
Where he's at, what that type of what a good year there could do for his recruitment. Is there any contenders in there outside? We've talked TCU. I think Arkansas is still a little involved. Obviously, Bama's one that's on my mind. What are some of these contenders outside of Nebraska that you're keeping an eye on?
Yeah, I think that both TCU and Alabama are interesting in this one. More so to me, Alabama, because of the history that Kalen DeBoer has with offense. And we've seen that develop over the last couple of years at Washington. We saw what they were doing. And we talked a lot. There's a lot of talk about kind of Michael Penix and those wide receivers that they had, and rightfully so, but they also ran the ball well too. And there's a good story to be told if you're Kalen DeVore about a pitch to say, hey, you can come be in this offense just like those guys. So Alabama is a team that I'm definitely watching there, but TCU is not to be forgotten either.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, that's just going to be recruitment we're keeping an eye on. I know that that's one that some people have circled as, potentially Nebraska's next commit. I think end of May and going into June could get a little crazy. I think it's hard to predict who exactly is going to be.
Yeah, things change quickly during this time.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, we'll have, as we go, we'll be shooting these now once a week. But once we get closer to June, we'll have some official visit previews and kind of a rundown of guys expected in town. While we've got you here, Greg, though, I want to talk some Midwest guys. Nebraska has had some of the top just players in the Midwest come to town this spring. They've had Jaden McGregory from Iowa, Mack Sutter from Illinois, Titan Davis from Missouri. Some of these top 26s, they're getting in on. Kind of, what are you hearing in some of these recruitment on where Nebraska stands, and are you seeing a more concern? I'm seeing it a little bit, but I've just gotten back here. You're a little more familiar, with this area for a couple of years now. Are you seeing Nebraska kind of getting back into that Midwest territory a lot harder than they used to in the past?
Yes, I think it started in there. Yeah. I think that it was always the plan when this staff took over under Matt Rule. I think that they kind of wanted to take a wait and see approach to see, like, they knew for sure that they were going to go to Texas, right? Like everybody talks about that. They knew they were going to go down to Texas and have a heavy presence there. You knew that they would have something in Florida as well, given some of the ties that they've had and some of the guys that Matt Rule initially hired, right? And so those two spots, and then I think that they were trying to wait and see mode on what they would do with the Midwest, see what they thought about the talent, but then also see, and this is important, I think people overlook this, if a lot of your staff came from Texas and a lot of them from Florida too, and that is a sneaky one that people forget, you don't have those same relationships with those high school coaches, those handlers, all those people in the Midwest, right? So it took a couple of years for them to build that up. And I think that they're doing a really good job, and they are making an effort to get more into that, especially in the Chicagoland area, where you named a bunch of those guys in 2026. A lot of them are from Illinois. So a couple from downstate, but most of them from the Chicagoland area. So I think that has definitely been a focus. We've seen some Wisconsin as well. We've seen some of that. I'd like to see them do more. I'd like to see them continue to do that, but there are only so many hours in the day to be able to recruit these spots that heavily.
For sure, for sure. I think you're definitely seeing, and one thing that's been interesting is how we consider the coldest part of the Midwest, but they are taking like a real approach to like making sure they're like leaving no stone unturned in the Dakotas, leaving no stone unturned in Iowa. And again, I don't think this is necessarily Midwest, but right now Colorado really isn't recruiting in state like that. Nebraska's really making an effort there to build some strong ties.
Yeah.
They're getting in at Littleton Heritage. It's a program that's traditionally produced a lot of guys. They took a 24 commit out of Heritage. They have a 25 commit out of Heritage. They're in on a 2026 four-star tight end in Camden Jensen, who visited last month for the spring game. But yeah, that's kind of where Nebraska's at in the Midwest, is just kind of trying to establish themselves. We talked about some individual recruitments. Nebraska's kind of putting themselves in the mix for Titan Davis. He spent close to 3 days on campus back in April. Kind of what are some of the contenders here, and where does Nebraska kind of stand right now?
Yeah, Titan's an interesting one too, because he's a kid that has continued to see his offer list explode here recently. Like, this offseason has been big for him, and which is why it's huge that Nebraska got a multi-day visit from him, because he's a kid. I think it's USC, LSU, Auburn have all offered this offseason. He's got all the Midwest programs as well. I think that this recruitment is going to be one of those national recruitments where you're going to look up and it'll be like Nebraska, USC, LSU teams that are battling for him, and it'll be a tough one. Like those big bodies out of that area are tough for Nebraska to nail down. But I think that getting in there early with him, right as he was blowing up or right before he was blowing up, will really go a long way, because they've really shown him something early in the recruitment. But that was going to be a fun one to watch.
Yeah, definitely. Davis, it's early, but Davis looks the part of one of those.
Well, yeah.
highly pursued, 2026 guys that's going to have one of those like top 10 loaded with P4 programs down to a top
Right.
5 loaded with the who's. That's going to be one of those recruitment that's going to be highly contested for a long, long time. Mack Sutter, that's another one that's probably maybe the hottest Midwest recruit in 2026 this offseason. He's completely exploded. Kind of what for those that are unfamiliar, kind of how would you describe Mack Sutter as a player? And then just talk about some of the contenders in his recruitment right now.
Yeah, Mac is one of the most fun stories of this offseason for me because I saw Mac. It was right. It wasn't that long after I actually transitioned into this job, so it had to be sometime in February, at a Pylon 7-on-7 event in Chicago, right? And I first get there, and you see him, and he's tall and lanky. He's jumping up, high pointing balls with one hand, like in warm ups and stuff. And I'm like, okay. So I asked the coach, I'm like, that has to be Mack Sutter, right? It's like, yeah, that's him. I'm like, it's the kid I've been hearing about. So that was kind of my introduction to him. He goes out there and just balls out during the 7-on-7 tournament. He was actually playing on like the second level team for Boom. If you're familiar with Boom in the Midwest, they're an awesome 7-on-7 program out of Chicago. Their top team has the quarterback is Jonas Williams. The star wide receiver is Taylor, who's one of our highest rated wide receivers in the entire class. But Mack Sutter led his second team to a victory in the final over that top team, right? And so I'm like, all right, this guy's got a little something. I don't think he's playing on the second team anymore, by the way, because since then, all he's done is blown up. He has like basically every offer in the country, it feels like. And I feel like every day I'm tweeting out about how he picked up another big time offer. This one, it's interesting because he really values the fact that Nebraska was his first offer. So before all of this happened, Nebraska saw his talent, and that went a long way with him. Now, there's some heavy hitters that are involved in this recruitment. Like, I mean, just pick a big time school and they're involved. So Michigan is one that is going to be in this one until the end. Notre Dame is another one that's going to be in this. He's got a lot of those Southern schools as well. I know he was really happy when that Florida offer came through as well. I think Nebraska, they are in it. But this was going to be a fight because he just has so many options as far as what he wants to do. And he is definitely that classic kind of hybrid stretch the field tight end that people really like to have. But he's a really good player.
For sure, for sure. One of my favorites so far. Just watching,
Yeah.
going through film, watching him. He's like a big receiver out there at 6'6",
Mm-hmm.
but obviously translates to tight end at the next level. One more, we kind of touched on him earlier, but Jaden McGregory, two-sport star out of
Mm-hmm.
Iowa. He came down to visit Nebraska in the spring and landed that offer. That's one that he hasn't necessarily blown up yet, but there's a good bit of there's a couple offers in there, that he's seriously considering. But feels like one that Nebraska feels like they've got in early on, correct?
Yeah, it's a good one for Nebraska to get in early on. And I'm not actually sure. Sometimes people ask me often, like, "Hey, this kid is blown up, but that kid didn't. Like, what's the deal?" This is one of those. I don't know why he hasn't blown up yet. Like to that kind of next big time national level. If you're Nebraska, you're perfectly fine with that not happening yet. They're strong. They're convinced in their early eval, and he's a good player. Like I think that looking at him, and I've seen him once already. I'll see him again this coming weekend, I think, too. In that he is a kind of a hybrid, right? Like, is he a corner? Is he a safety? I think for Nebraska and their defense that they run, I don't know if it matters as much because they like to cross train those guys and move them around anyway. And so he's just a playmaker that could be in that back five in that Tony White defense for Evan Cooper back there. So I really like him, and we'll see kind of where his recruitment goes. So I think it's just a matter of time before you start to see those like other big time offers really roll in.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, and then we wanted to close off on this. Talking 2026, something you're seeing Nebraska do a lot of, and part of it is just taking advantage of the talent that's popped up in the region. But in the Midwest, they've offered a lot of tight ends already in 2020.
Right.
Some of these top 26 Midwest tight ends have offers from Nebraska. Multiple of them, Ian Premer. We talked about Mack Sutter, but Ian Premer, Camden Jensen, a bunch of these top 26 tight ends have already made their way to campus. What do you make of Nebraska going so heavy at that position, considering the guys they already currently have on campus, the guys that they're bringing to campus, and just how important that position is becoming for Nebraska?
Yeah, I think it's really, this is something to me that I think we haven't fully seen how they want to deploy all of those tight ends. Like I think the offense last year was so limited, given the quarterback play situation, that we haven't gotten a full glimpse of what they want to do. I think that all of these offers to these tight ends and these guys that are kind of these like unicorns that are big, strong, and can really run and catch passes and stretch defenses. I think that gives us a real good indication that they want to be able to have these guys as chess pieces that they can move around and create mismatches all over the field. Like their perfect world is where they've got these guys, you've got some of these tight ends that, kind of look like, Carter Nelson or Thomas Fedoni, or if you project it further with the Mack Sutters of the world, but then you've also got kind of, your speedsters and Jalen Lloyd, and you've got kind of a different type of unicorn and Malachi Coleman on the outside. Like, and you've got all these guys, and you're a defense trying to figure out how in the world am I supposed to match up with all these players. Like, I think that's what they're trying to build. And I think that the tight end position, like you mentioned, and the types of offers and the amount of offers that they have out there right now in 26 really goes to show just like what it is that they're actually trying to build, especially when you compare it to what we've seen them have to run in the first year under Matt Rule.
No doubt, no doubt. Yeah, and that's something I'm curious to watch as well. I think something we've picked up from spring too is Marcus Satterfield taking over that position. He's got these guys learning the entire offense, not just, what they're doing as tight ends. I think you're going to see that role expand in Nebraska, or what the tight ends do in Nebraska's offense. I think you're going to see that expand a lot more. Even the way they're talking to some of these 25 tight ends they're after. Obviously, they're after 4-star Chase Lofton in state, 3-star Riemann Siebert in state. They already have a commitment from 3-star Bear Tenney. They're telling these tight ends, like all of them too, that, hey, you're going to have an opportunity to come here and compete early. And they're saying that knowing, Carter Nelson's coming on campus this summer. They're saying that knowing Thomas Fedoni's currently on campus. They're saying that knowing, they've got bodies in that tight end room that they're comfortable playing already. And they're still telling guys, hey, come and play. So they're not afraid to play at that position. But again, it's just something I don't think we've seen
Right.
exactly what their goal is with the position. But I'm very curious to see how they use that position. And again, like how they're able to point, Thomas Fedoni's development or point Carter Nelson's development to the Mack Sutters of the world and be like, you should come to Nebraska because this is how we're going to use you. That's just something that's just
It'd
unknown
be
right now.
huge.
But I think we figure that out in the fall.
Yeah, it would be huge if they can get like in the Thomas Fedoni as a recruiting tool would be is just a huge deal. Like, and that maybe is like a little X factor for the season too, and for how they end up doing recruiting wise with some of these tight ends, because we saw him start to get there after he has that fully healthy season. If he can take a leap and they can then point to that, because the most powerful thing that you can do in recruiting is have actual examples of what you're trying to sell kids, and they can see it in your uniform. You're not having to show them cut ups of Baylor film or Temple film. You can see what someone did in the Nebraska uniform. That's huge.
For sure, for sure. And for Fedoni, obviously that would be big for his draft stock, and more than anything, again, like that story of what he's been through,
Oh, yeah.
beyond the actual on-field development that he's gotten under this staff. I think more than anything, it would go to show just how committed this staff was to him, considering he was a guy that they inherited. He was a guy that's dealing with a bunch of injuries. They inherited. He bought into he had to re-buy in to
Right.
Rule's way of things. And it could pay off, and him finally realizing his potential, as I think we had him ranked as the number one tight end in the country a couple years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, we did. So it would be nice for him. That would be a heck of a story. That even you saying that, that's a feature story or a game day story waiting to happen. If he can put that together, given like all of the injuries that he went through and the setback and just how determined he's been. Yeah, that would be an incredible story.
For sure, for sure. Well, Greg, we appreciate you. Hoping to do this more often. Like we said, we're back up running this Recruiting Blitz podcast once a week. Expect this, in your feeds, wherever you get this, on YouTube, on audio, wherever you get this, every Monday. We're going to be running this through the summer, through the season, just with all the top recruiting news, some top headlines running through these stories like we did today, or some of these top storylines like we did today. And Greg, kind of where can they find your work, kind of anything you're working on, anything you want to plug real quick?
Yeah, you can get, if most of you watching this, you can get me on Twitter at Greg Smith Rivals. Check out rivals.com. Plugs, I got something cooking for a podcast as well, that'll be coming shortly, maybe in a month or so. So we'll see there, but keep an eye out for that too.
For sure, for sure. Well, once again, Greg, we appreciate you, and to everyone out there, appreciate y'all listening. And once again, please feel free to like and subscribe, and we'll be back next week.